Okay, right, well we're going to be looking at the advanced sweep picking exercise now. I'm going to be breaking it down into sections just like the intermediate and the beginner examples. So here's section 1 slow and then we'll break it down. Okay, this section starts with a B minor arpeggio, but it's using string skipping technique first before we get into any kind of sweep picking technique. It's going to start on the 11th fret on the G string, then it's going to pull off to the 7th fret, hammer on the 9th fret on the D, then pull off to the 7th fret on the D, then re-hammer the 9th fret on the D, then we're back on the 7th fret on the G string, hammering on the 11th fret and then on the G also, and then skipping over the B and landing on the 7th fret on the high E string. So let's just play that and see what it sounds like. Okay, continuing using the same arpeggio, we're then going to move up to the 10th fret on the high E string, pull off to 7, skip over the B string, then play the 11th fret on the G, pull off to the 7th fret on the G, then re-hammer on the 11th fret on the G string, skip back over the B string to play the 7th fret on the high E string, then 10 on the high E, and then finish up the next part of the arpeggio by pulling off to 7 from the 10th fret. So let's just play that and see how that sounds. Okay, moving up the arpeggio, we're playing another arpeggio which is still going to be in the key of B minor. This is going to start on the 14th fret on the high E string. Then it's going to pull off to the 10th fret on the high E, hammer on the 12th fret. Then this is where our sweep picking starts with the arpeggio. As we've done a lot of this stuff in the intermediate example, it's just going to be a downward sweep from the 11th fret on the G string. So we'll have finishing on an upstroke on the 14th fret and then pulling off to the 10th fret. So the frets are again 14 on the high E, pull off to 10, then hammer on the 12th fret on the B, then we're starting our downward stroke on the 11th fret on the G string, then downward stroke on the 12th fret on the B, downward stroke on the 10th fret on the high E string, upward stroke on the 14th fret on the high E, then pull off to the 10th fret. So let me just play that and see how it sounds. Okay, so let me just play all the examples that we've looked at so far, just so you can see how it's progressing. Okay, and finally to finish up the B minor arpeggio, and we're going to be going up to the 19th fret on the high E string, then pulling off to the 14th fret on the high E, hammering on 15 on the B, then hammering 16 on the G, then with an upward sweep, we're then going to go back to the 14th fret on the high E, then play the 15th fret on the B, then the 16th fret on the G, and then pull off to 14 on the G. So let me just play that for you so you can see how that sounds. Okay, so now the next part of the section 1 is just going to be a diminished descending arpeggio starting on the 17th fret on the high E string. So let me just kind of play the first pattern, and this is the kind of thing we're going to be expecting throughout this arpeggio section. So it's literally just going to be pick the first note, then pull off the next note, then hammer on the next two, and then followed by an upward sweep. So let me just play that again for you. Pick, pull off, hammer on, and then an upward sweep, playing the same notes, and then just pulling off onto the last note. So the actual frets that we're using for the arpeggio starts on the 17th fret on the high E string, pull off to the 14th fret on the high E, then hammer on 16 on the B, then 17 on the G, then revisit 14th fret on the high E, with an upward stroke, then another upward stroke on the 16th fret on the B, upstroke on the 17th fret on the G, and then pull off to the 14th fret on the G. So again, we've got this. Okay, so now we're going to be applying that same sweeping technique, but to a different part of the arpeggio. So it's just going to be continuing down this descending diminished arpeggio. Starting on the 16th fret on the B string, using the exact same right-hand technique that we did for the first arpeggio section. Going to be starting on the 16th fret with a downstroke, pulling off to the 13th fret on the B string, then hammering the 14th fret on the G, then hammering 16 on the D, then going back to the 13th fret on the D. This is going to be our upward sweep. So 13, 14 on the G, then 16 on the D, then pulling off to 13 on the D. So let me just play the first two sections so you can see how it's starting to sound. Ready? Okay, continuing on, using the same sweep picking technique. We've got a bit more of a stretch now. We're starting to sort of go a bit further down the guitar and further down the strings as well. The sort of harmonies are getting further apart. So now we're going to start this next part of the arpeggio on the 14th fret on the G with a downstroke, then pulling off to the 11th fret on the G, hammering on the 13th fret on the D string, then hammering on the 15th fret on the A string, then starting with the upward sweep from the 11th fret on the G through to 13th fret on the D, then the 15th fret on the A string, pulling off to the 12th fret on the A string. Okay, so let me just play that for you so you can hear how that sounds. Okay, for the last part of this diminished arpeggio, we're going to be finishing up starting on the 13th fret on the D string with a downstroke, pulling off to the 10th fret on the D, then hammering on the 12th fret on the A, then hammering the 14th fret on the E, then going back, starting our upward sweep from the D string on the 10th fret through to the 12th fret on the A string, then the 14th fret on the bottom E, and then pulling off, finishing off the descending arpeggio on the 11th fret on the bottom E string. So let me just play that for you so we can see how that sounds. Okay, so let me just play through section one again slow, just so you can see how all those arpeggio ideas have started to take shape. Okay, now we're going to take a look at section two. I'm going to play through that slow for you, and then we'll break that down. Okay, now we're going to look at the beginning of section two. This section is pretty similar to the beginning of section one, but it's going to be in the key of E minor instead of B minor. So let's take a look at it. It's going to start with a string skipping arpeggio in E minor, starting on the 15th fret on the high E string. So pulling off from the 15th fret to the 12th fret on the high E string, then hammering the 16th fret on the G string, pulling off to the 12th fret, then hammering on the 16th fret on the G string, skipping over the B string, hammering on the 12th fret on the high E, hammering on the 15th fret on the high E, and then pulling off to 12. So we'll have this. Okay, then moving up the E minor arpeggio, and we're then going to extend it up to the 19th fret, and we're going to have this shape, which we've seen quite a lot already. So 19th fret, pull off to the 15th fret on the high E string, then hammer on the 17th fret on the B string, then 16th fret on the G, and then from that point we're starting our upward sweep at this point. Back up the same arpeggio, so 16 on the G, 17 on the B, 15 on the high E, and then 19 on the high E, pull off to 15, so we'll have this. So putting the first two parts together, it should sound like this. Okay, and the last part of the arpeggio is going to be way up on the 24th fret, and we're going to be playing 24, then pulling off to 19, hammering on 20 on the B string, then hammering on 21 on the G. Then we're going to start our upward sweep pick from the 19th fret on the high E string, hammering onto 20 on the B, and then 21 on the G, and then pulling off to 19 on the G. So we'll have this. You might notice that playing this at a slow speed, the actual the 21st fret on the, the 20th fret on the B string sometimes kind of ends up clashing with the 19th fret, but normally with the sort of faster you get with this, the more articulate that note will become. So as you speed it up, it should become a bit clearer. But I mean, aim to get it as clean as you can at a fairly comfortable tempo, just so it'll be still clean when you speed it up. And then after doing that, we're just going to repeat the middle arpeggio that we looked at. So let me just play all those sections back to back so you can hear how it sounds. Okay, and that arpeggio sequence that we've just looked at is repeated twice. Then we're going to be looking at the next part, which is like two major sweep arpeggios. The first one is going to start on the 15th fret on the bottom E string, and it's going to look like this. Okay, so we're starting with all downward sweeps on this arpeggio. So downward stroke using our second finger on the 15th fret on the bottom E string. Then the downward sweep continues onto the A string with your first finger on the 14th fret. Then you're going to hammer on the 17th fret, so on the A. Then you're going to bar your third finger to cover the 17th fret on the D as well, so we'll have this. Then carrying on the sweep, second finger then comes in, plays the 16th fret on the G string, and then ending up on the B string and the high E string, barring our first finger on the 15th fret, so we'll have, and then finishing up on the 19th fret, so we'll have this. So that 19th fret that's played on the high E string, just to finish that part of the arpeggio, is actually hammered on when you get to the top, so you'll have... Okay, from the 19th fret on the high E string, we'll be sliding up that little finger to the 22nd fret, and then coming down G major, which is going to be pull off from 22 to 19 on the high E, hammer on 20 on the B string, then hammer on 19 on the G, 21 on the D, 22 on the E, on the A, and then pull off to 19 and finish off the arpeggio on the 19th fret on the A string. So let me just play that whole arpeggio so you can see how that looks. So if you notice, the sweeping on this is only ascending from the bottom E to the top E, and then we're using legato technique on the way down. And this is going to be the same technique and the same shape applied to the next arpeggio, which we're going to look at, which is D major. And it's going to be exactly the same shape, but just played from the 10th fret on the bottom E string, using exactly the same fingering and the same sweep picking technique as well. So. On this ascending part of the D major scale, we're just going to be finishing up on the 17th fret on the A string, instead of pulling off like we did on the G major from the 22nd fret to the 19th fret. We're just going to descend down the D major arpeggio, but then just finish on the 17th fret. So here's the arpeggio again. Okay, now after we finish those two major arpeggio sweep picking sections, we're then going to repeat the first part of section 2 again. So then that concludes section 2, and then the whole of section 2 is repeated again. So then after playing after the two major arpeggio sections, we're then going to go and play that again twice, which would be the beginning of section 2. So now we're going to move on to section 3. I'll just play this slow and then we'll break it down. Okay, looking at the first arpeggio in section 3, it's going to be a C major string skipped arpeggio, and we're going to start on the 12th fret on the high E string. Then we're going to pull off to the 8th fret on the high E string, skip over the B string, then hammer on the 12th fret on the G, pull off to the 9th fret on the G, then re-hammer the 12th fret, skip over the B string, then hammer on the 8th fret on the high E string, hammer on the 12th fret on the high E string, and then just pull off to the 8th fret. So it should sound like this. So that's just played once, and then the next part of the arpeggio, which is still C major, is just going to be the 15th fret, pulled off to the 12th fret on the high E string, hammer on the 13th fret on the B string, then the 12th fret on the G, then we're going to start our downward sweep. So 12, 13 on the B, 12 on the high E, then 15 with an upstroke, and then pulled off to 12. So now I'm just going to play both the examples together that we've just looked at so you can see how it sounds. Okay, so those two arpeggios that have been put together, that little bit is just repeated twice. So then we're going to move on to diminished ascending arpeggio, starting on the 12th fret, which is kind of sort of like a C sharp vibe going on. So we're going to start on the 12th fret on the high E string, pull off to the 9th fret on the high E string, then hammer on the 11th fret on the B, hammer the 12th fret on the G, then we'll start with an upstroke or an upward sweep from the 9th fret on the high E string, then hammer on 11 again, then 12 again, and then pull off from the 12th fret to the 9th fret. So we'll have this. So this arpeggio shape is going to be repeated with the start note, which is going to be a sort of tone and a half above the last note that we started on. So if I'll just demonstrate. Okay, so our first note was starting on the 12th fret. So we keep the same arpeggio pattern, same shape, same sweeping technique and everything, but then we'll just start it from the 15th fret. So we'll have then the same thing again, but starting from the 18th fret. And then the last part, which is going to be on the 21st fret. So, Okay, so let me just play that example for you again, just so you can see how they join up. Okay, now looking at the next set of arpeggios for section 3, it's exactly the same, but everything that we've just looked at is 2 frets higher. So instead of starting on the 12th fret and doing the major arpeggios that we were doing, we're now going to be doing it from the 14th fret, which is 2 frets up from the 12th fret. So now we're going to have D major. Okay, so we're using exactly the same techniques as what we were before, and then after repeating that section twice, we're then going to go into sort of E flat diminished, and we're going to be starting this on the 14th fret on the high E, and then we're going to be using the same diminished pattern as we were using before, starting from the 12th fret, but just from the 14th fret now. So we're going to do. Then the next fret we're going to start this from is the 17th fret. Then fret 20. Then up to 23. And then that brings us nicely into section 4, which is going to conclude the actual advanced sweep picking exercise that we've been looking at. Okay, now we're going to be taking a look at section 4. Again, I'm just going to do a slow playthrough of the arpeggios that we're going to be using in this section, and then we'll break it down. Okay, the first arpeggio that we're going to be looking at, we've already seen in section 3. It's the really long G major arpeggio that starts on the bottom E string. So let me just remind you of that. We're starting on the 15th fret on the bottom E string with the second finger, and we're just going to be doing downward sweeps. There's not really going to be any upward sweeping at all in this section. So we're just going to have 15 on the low E, 14 on the A, then hammer on to fret 17 on the A, then bar your third finger, then play 17 on the D, 16 on the G, 15 on the B, and then 15 on the high E, hammer on the 19th fret on the high E. Then we're going to slide our little finger down from 19 to 17, and then we're going to come down D major. Okay, so that's going to be 17, pull off to 14, then hammer on to 15 on the B, and then 14 on the G, 16 on the D, and then finishing up on 17 on the A, pulling off to 12 on the A, and then hammering 14 on the low E. So let me just play through that slow for you so you can see how that sounds. Okay, that first arpeggio section with a G major and a D major is actually quite a good practice routine if you just isolate those two arpeggios and just keep practicing them over and over. That will really help with the whole of section 4, getting used to that kind of motion. Okay, now we've come down D major. We're now going to play E minor, which is going to look like this. So it's going to start on the 12th fret on the low E, and then it's going to be like this. So. Okay, so this E minor arpeggio is going to start on the 12th fret on the low E with a downward stroke. Then we're going to go to the 10th fret on the A string, then we're going to be hammering on the 14th fret, barring it, so then we're going to play the 14th fret on the D, then we're going to bar our first finger over the 12th fret, so we're going to have G, B and E, and then our little finger's going to hammer on the 15th fret on the high E, so we're going to have this. Okay, and then after that what's going to happen is when our little finger's landed on the 15th fret on the high E string, it's going to slide down to the 14th fret on the high E, and then we're going to come down B minor. So we're going to play 14 on the high E, pull off to 10, then hammer on the 12th fret on the B, 11th fret on the G, 12th fret on the D, 14th fret on the A string, then a bit of a stretch to the 9th fret on the A, and then the 10th fret on the low E, and then that concludes the B minor arpeggio. So when you put them together it should sound like this. Okay, the next arpeggio we're going to be looking at is C major, and it's going to be the same shape going up the guitar as it was when we were doing G major, but we're just going to be starting on the 8th fret, so it's going to look like this. Can you play that again? Okay, so the fretted notes for this are going to be 8th fret on the low E string, 7th fret on the A, then we're hammering on the 10th fret on the A, so then we're barring our third finger on the 10th fret so we can get the 10th fret in the D, and then the 9th fret on the G string, then bar our first finger on the 8th fret on the B and E strings, so we're going to have, and then hammer on your little finger on the 12th fret on the high E, so we're going to have this. Okay, and then we're going to come down G major. It's going to be slightly different than the major arpeggio that we used before, whereas we're not going to be descending with quite the same sort of stretch. So we're just going to be looking at doing this. Okay, so the fretted notes for the G major arpeggio are going to start on the 10th fret on the high E string, then we're going to pull off to the 7th fret, then hammer on the 8th fret on the B string, then hammer on the 7th fret on the G, 9th fret on the D, 10th fret on the A, then pull off to 7 from 10 on the A, and then the last note will be the first note we started on, which was C on the 8th fret on the low E string. So let me just play those two together so you can see how that sounds. Okay, now the last arpeggio that we're going to be looking at is D major, which we've already sort of seen. Let me just remind you of that. It's going to start on the 10th fret on the low E string, and it's going to look like this. Then what we're going to do is we're going to continue the D major scale, and then we're just going to slide up from 14 to 17 on the high E, and then just come down like that. So let me just explain that for you. We're going to be starting on the 10th fret on the low A string, on the low E string. Then we're going to play the 9th fret on the A string. Then hammer on the 12th fret on the A. So we're going to have, then bar third finger again on the 12th fret so we can get the D string in there as well. So then the 11th fret on the G. Then bar our first finger on the 10th fret on the B and high E string. Then hammer on with our little finger from 10 to 14 on the high E. Then slide our little finger from the 14th fret up to the 17th fret. Then pull off back to the 14th fret again, so we're going to have, so 17, pull off to 14, then we're going to hammer on 15 on the B string, 14 on the G, 16 on the D, 17 on the A, then we've got a bit of a stretch from 17 to 12 on the A, and then finishing up on the 14th fret on the low E string. So let me just play those two together again so you can see how that sounds. Okay, well that concludes section 4, and then that takes us right back into section 1 again, which was... Okay, so hopefully you will have got a handle on that. And basically what's going to happen now is you're just going to play that whole arrangement again. So section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4, and then the whole thing's repeated again. And then on the end of, and then what happens after that is you play section 1 again, but you only play section 1 on its own. And then on the end of the descending arpeggio sweep, there's just a bend on the 15th fret. So let me just do that for you quickly so you can see how that sounds. Okay, well that concludes section 4. There's definitely a lot more sweeping techniques going on in that one. So what I will say with the bigger 6-string sweeps is just to take the shifts that we've been looking at. So for example, G major, and then just coming down the D major. And if you take those sections with the shifts in and just practice each one at a slow tempo, and then when you feel comfortable, just speed it up. And then mainly section 4 will probably need the most work in the advanced sweeping exercise that we've looked at. So basically just practice it slow, and then when you have it comfortable, just speed it up.